So we fundamentally have an objective function at Counsel Fiduciary, which is to develop a plan that has a reasonable probability that you do not run out of money before you run out of time. And so all of our work is around addressing and hopefully achieving this objective function. And I'd like you to keep this in context. There's going to be a few framework ideas, foundational ideas, groundwork ideas. And I'd like you to keep in mind this idea that fundamentally, and in fact, if you don't care about not running out of money before running out of time, double negative, I recognize. If that's not a concern to you, then you know this presentation is probably a waste of your time. Frankly, we find that this is fundamentally the most important objective with increasing risk around it. And so that's where that idea of financial planning under uncertainty comes. I'd also like to start with a few perspectives that if there's nothing else you take away from this presentation, it is to add these to your toolbox, if you will. And that is to recognize a few fundamental ideas that maybe the incoherent people are not necessarily recognizing. The first is to question your assumptions. And we're going to come back to this over and over and over again in this presentation. It is something that our portfolio manager and statistician, Susan Middleton, learned in the very first day of her master's degree program in statistics. They drilled into her head and her classmates to question, what are your assumptions? If you're not conscious of your assumptions, we all make assumptions. We cannot live in this world without making assumptions. But if you're not conscious of them, then that just leads to a higher probability that you might end up going awry. The second thing I'd like to recognize is that there is no such thing as risk-free. There are only trade-offs. And in fact, if we think about Bernie Madoff and how he made off with all of his clients' money, he promised them a S&P return without S&P risk. And if we recognize that there's no such thing as risk-free, if we're faced with Bernie Madoff trying to sell us something, we will immediately say, well, wait a minute, this is not possible. There are trade-offs here between risks. And again, Catherine and I are going to spend the second half of this conversation talking about those trade-offs. But it's important to recognize that risk-free does not occur in this realm. The last idea, and it's something that keeps Susan and me very humble, is to recognize that all models are wrong, some are useful. And we only need to look at epidemiology this crazy year to recognize that there have been an awful lot of modelers who've gotten their models really wrong. And most of them have not been useful.